Silver is completely optional, folks. We have got some hand sanitizer if you'd like to use it, so you can try and keep your hands as clean as possible.
Well, I'm more concerned about breaking the other one.
Now?
Are you scared of dark?
Nice.
Okay.
So feel free to take photos while we're in here, guys. I just hope there's going to be enough oxygen to go around for everybody while we're in here. If you do feel the air starting to get very thin at any point, my advice is just take short, rapid breaths. Please don't be afraid to panic. That's a great philosophy to have in life. So, I didn't tell you that I was going to be telling you quite a bit about the rocks and the geology around here, so I think we'll just start off with the basics. I am determined to make you all into fully fledged geologists by the time the tour is over. But just starting with the groundwork, geologists have a very fancy word that they like to give to this stuff here. They like to refer to it as rock. There you go. How mind-blowing is that? You're already well on your way. This particular type of rock we're surrounded by right now is limestone, which I'm sure you've all heard of. And the limestone around here, it would have been formed around 300 million years ago. So we're talking about a point in time just after we had the Brexit referendum, if your memory goes back that far. Now, at that point in time, where we're standing now, it would have been the bottom of a shallow tropical sea. And when the creatures in the sea would die, their bodies would drift down to the bottom of the ocean, where they were crushed down by the weight of all the water, until eventually they turned into limestone. So I don't want to sound overly morbid, everyone, but you are now surrounded by millions upon millions of crushed dead bodies. It's just what you want to hear on a family-friendly day out, isn't it? And a few million years after that, there would have been lots of volcanoes erupting around here. That's how the valley was formed as we see it today. Now, when those volcanoes will blast their way out the earth, they will cause great big cracks to erupt in the rock, and those cracks got filled up with different kinds of molten minerals that got trapped underground and hardened over time. Okay, and that's how lots of minerals got down here. Flash forward now to the year 1670, and a man called John Walker was a farmer who worked in the field directly above where we're standing now. And one day, when he was up there, he found a few specks of a very shiny mineral just underneath the surface of the soil. And that made him realise there must be some kind of mineral deposit down here. So he got together with a few family members, and together they dug a mine shaft down to that point right there. You can see that built-up wall blocking off the point where his mine shaft brought him down here 352 years ago. And when he got down here, he discovered enormous amounts of that shiny mineral that he'd found. I've got some of it to show you here. Now, this is what the ancient Greeks used to call galena. And galena in Greek means the bright one or the shiny one. You can see it is quite shiny, like silver. Galena, though, is where we actually derive the names Helen and Helena from today. So if you know anyone by that name, you can just let her know that she was named after a shiny lump of highly poisonous rock. And I'm sure she'll find that very flattering indeed. Does that apply to anyone with me right now by any chance? I just have to ask because I once wound up with 3 Helens in a single tour group. That made a really awkward experience, you can imagine. Today, though, we have a very different name for galena that I'm sure you've all probably heard of. This is lead. So we're standing in what used to be a lead mine. And back when John Walker was alive, lead was actually more valuable than gold or silver. because we had lots of different uses for it. I don't know if I've got any experts in chemistry with me right now, but does anyone know just off the top of their head what letters we give to lead in the periodic table?
Oh gosh.
PB, very good, madam. You don't know any Latin as well as chemistry, do you? No. Does anyone happen to know the Latin word we get PB from? You don't have to put you out of misery then. The Romans called it plumbum. Feel free to get a bit of a giggle out of that word. And plumbum is where we get the words plumber and plumbing from today, because they used to make pipes out of this stuff. Something else the Romans would do with lead, they would actually grind it into a powder and sprinkle it into their wine. They did that to make it taste sweeter. And right up until Victorian times, we were also putting it into our bread flour to make it turn white. That, though, was before they found out that lead is just a tiny, tiny little bit toxic. So if you're putting it in your food and drink, that might cause a bit of a nasty side effect that we today like to refer to as death. We are now, thankfully, a bit better informed, and the next time that you fancy getting drunk on red wine, folks, because let's face it, we've all been there, that's where I am at this very moment, in fact, you don't need to worry about lead poisoning, just good old-fashioned chronic liver failure. So don't say it's all bad news on my tours. Have you got any questions for me at this point? No. Right, I'm going to hop over the fence now and I'm going to start leading you into that tunnel system there, which back in the mining days was something called a pipe vein. It would have been a solid seam of lead running through the hillside. So yet another one of those 150 million year old volcanic cracks. I need to remind you at this point, this is that point of no return that I warned you of earlier, because beyond that junction it's not really possible to try and make your way back through the pipe vein, especially since there's another group coming in behind us. We don't want to end up with a blockage in the back passage, I'm sure you can imagine. So if you don't want to take on those 159 steps, or if you've decided at this point that you don't like me, now's the time to escape the way you've come. But if you're brave or foolhardy enough to want to see more of the place, I'll just start leading the way in. Alright.
Not yet.
I've been talking with the why am I landing? I'm only 5. I don't know if I'm gonna look down or up.
You can see here where it actually branches off into a completely different mine. Just to give you an idea of what a booming industry lead mining was around here, there was a time when there were 9 mines just here in the Matlock Bath area. And they left behind over 10 miles of tunnel system in these hills. So if you do ever find yourself in need to dispose of a dead body, you can just bring it here. We've got plenty of storage room going to spare. Alright, just make sure you mind your heads at this point coming up. You might be able to spot a random blood stain or a bit of brain matter dangling down. I'm looking at you back there, sir.
Oh, my back. Oops, watch out.
great thing about being at the front, we get a rest now while everyone behind has to catch up.
We already did this to ourselves.
Sometimes it's just a little bit like watching natural selection at work. So that's now 42 upward steps out of the way, but don't worry, we've still got 117 left to go. The fun and games are far from over at this point. Just catch your breath here. If you look at the rock above you, you can see all the scratches left behind by the school group that got lost down here. The company would like me to say that was a tragic accident, but between you and me, I was in a very bad mood that day, and they were just pushing all the wrong buttons. So now they're actually marks left behind by the pickaxes the miners would have been using in here to chip away at the rock to get that shiny lead out. And you can even see a few black soot marks left behind by the candles that they would have been using to light their way. So you can get a very good idea of their working conditions. Just so you know, they would have been chipping away at the lead ore in here at a rate of just 2 inches a day. So it was very slow grinding work. Okay, let's go.
Hmm? No, we'll go. I know you're brave.
No, thank you. Maganda yung view dito.
Hmm? Still up.
Oh, I'm going to tell you in just a second, but you might not like the answer. Right, so it's not very difficult to see where our lighting budget ran out, is it, folks? Just to remind you that in only 5 minutes' time, in fact even less than 5 minutes, we've walked through over 60 years worth of mining work. Where we are now is somewhere that we proudly call the Great Chamber. You can't see a lot of it right now, but the Great Chamber is over 150 feet long. It's more than 90 feet high, and right now, in answer to your question, madam, we're now around 130 feet underground. So you probably won't be able to get a phone signal down here if you want to scream for help. I'm afraid you're now trapped in here with me and my sparkling personality. How's that for a terrifying thought? So you saw all the pickaxe marks on the rock in the pipe vein, but if you look at the rock walls in here, you won't be able to find a single pickaxe mark in the whole place. And that is because the Great Chamber doesn't have anything to do with volcanoes erupting millions of years ago. This place was formed naturally 10,000 years ago. It's a much later edition. You're all grown up, so I'm sure that you all know what water erosion is, when water gradually weathers away rock over time. At the end of the last ice age, the water that was coming down from the melting ice glaciers slipped into the cracks in the rock and eroded it over time, until eventually we wound up with this gigantic chamber carved into the hillside. That's why you don't see any pickaxe marks, because it was just hollowed out by water. And it's also why you get these very strange shapes all around you, from where the water was eddying about in the chamber, breaking off additional chunks of rock. They call that scalloping. Now, that water, of course, would have washed quite a bit of material down from the surface. Some of it was lead, but most of it was just soft, sandy soil that gradually filled the place in and eventually sealed it off. That's how it would stay hidden for almost 10,000 years until it was found again in 1699. Now, the man who found this particular chamber was called John Tinker. And just like John Walker a few years before him, he knew there was lead in these hills. So he dug his very own mine shaft down through the rock and he breached into the chamber at that point right there. That's the bottom of John Tinker's 120-foot shaft. Feel free to get a bit of a cheeky giggle from that remark. He would come down that mine shaft with nothing more than a bucket and spade. He would shovel up the sand and take it back up to the surface, where he would, in most cases, simply sift through it to find those shiny little bits of galena that he would sell on to become a rich man. It only took him 6 years to empty this gigantic chamber all by himself. That's how easy it was. Now, guys, here is where things start getting really traumatic for you, as if they weren't bad enough already. Because I'm now going to switch off most of the lights to recreate how dark you would have found it down here. Alright? The lights at the back of the chamber are going to remain on if you would prefer to hang back where there's a bit of light throughout proceedings. If you want to get the best view of the light show that I'll be putting on, you just want to be somewhere maybe a little bit closer to where I'm standing here. So it's entirely up to you where you choose to park yourselves. We're coming down very gullible people today. So it is about to get rather dark in here. If you're nervous and need a bit of reassurance, you need only grab hold of someone. But please make sure it's someone you know. Let's avoid any awkward or potentially illegal moments. The lights going off in 3, 2, and 1. Now, can I just issue a very polite warning to whoever's caressing my leg at this point? It's not that I don't appreciate the sentiment, but it's a little bit distracting. I'm sure you'll appreciate as well, it would have been much too dark to get any work done down here. That's why Mr. Tinker would have been bringing candles down with him so he could see where he was going. So first of all, if you want to raise your eyes to the roof of the chamber. Now, can you see that candle that's just come on up there?
Oh, wow.
That's roughly where he would have been in 1699 when he began digging away. After 1 or 2 years of work, that's where he would have gotten to, all the way out there.
That's good.
And a few years later, he was able to add yet another 4 candles, and there's a 2 Ronnie's gag in there, if you can appreciate the reference. Now, after 6 years, all the lead was gone, and the great chamber was then simply abandoned for over 100 years. However, in the year 1845, someone bought the rights to this chamber for the very expensive cost of £4. Alright, so that's when the first visitors began coming down here, 1845. But the pipe vein that we've come through was still being mined out at that point, and that meant that they had a very different way of getting people down here. You, as a tourist, had to go to the top of the hillside where you paid a small fee for entry. Then you got into a bucket and you were lowered down the mine shaft into the darkness. That was the good old-fashioned way of getting you down here before health and safety had to ruin all the fun for us. Just typical when you think about it. And once you were down here, you were simply sold a few candles and left to wander around by yourself. But you can see the candles don't do the best job of lighting up the place, which is why they installed a brand new lighting system that I'll be recreating for you now. It is about to get really bright in here all of a sudden, folks, so you might want to watch your eyes just a little bit, you have been warned. So those new show lights are coming on in 3, 2, and 1.
Oh, fancy.
See why I warned you? How impressive is that? A candle chandelier.
I have my eyes closed.
Like I said, very gullible. It always makes me laugh when I give that warning and I see people putting their sunglasses on. Yeah, but that's the finest lighting system that Victorian era technology can buy. And today, with the aid of some more modern technology, here's the light show I can put on for you.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So there you can see the great chamber at its full extent. Before I let you disperse to take your photographs, have you noticed coming through the caves that the rock often shimmers and sparkles? Yeah, that's a mineral that you find very commonly around here. It's called calcite. You'll find it wherever you find limestone. Just switching these lights on. What you've got here is a gigantic geode of calcite crystals. So when the volcanoes were erupting millions of years ago, all this calcite got trapped in a pocket of air and it crystallized like this. You will have actually eaten calcite if you've ever taken paracetamol, because we use it as a bulking agent. So if my constant droning on is giving you a splitting migraine at this point, just take a big bite into the rock here. I can guarantee you won't have a headache anymore. You'll have too much of a toothache to keep you distracted. You've got another one up there, shaped just like Mick Jagger's lips, I'm sure you'll agree. So feel free to go as far down as the barrier there for the minute or so we're spending in here. Take plenty of photos.
I wanna see the purple one.
You can see the elephant there, holding up the chandelier in his trunk with his wide open mouth and his beady eye watching us.
That's right.
Rocky the elephant, as we like to call him, but normally we don't talk about the great big elephant in the room. That, and just mind your head on Headache Rock. You can see the blood and hair attached to it. Get out of the views there. Some people really do get blood on them.
Count the steps.
I don't want to. I want to focus on what I'm stepping on.
Oh, I think, yeah, we wait here.
Look.
Where are we waiting?
Right, this is the antechamber, everyone. It's the very last place you're going to see on the tour. There's a few things I'd like to show you in here. Why don't we start off with that writing you can see up there on the wall? Now that is something that you'll actually see in every single lead mine around here. There's one of these on the wall in the Great Chamber, but I didn't point it out to you because this is a much better example. It's called a miner's plaque or a miner's journal. They would carve that into the rock basically as a kind of stamp of ownership. So they could stake their claim to the chamber along with whatever lead deposits would have been up for grabs. So, if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, you can clearly see the date, 1705. So we know that mining operations began in here 317 years ago. You also have the initials of the very first people that were working here from that time. You have two brothers on the exterior there, Ezra and Thomas Whitworth. Those two brothers were what you would call the bar masters of the mine. Bar masters were a lot like on-site managers or agents acting on behalf of the owner, and they were in charge of all sorts of duties. Two more brothers, Isaiah and Mordecai Fern, who lived in Bonsall, where a lot of the miners came from. Can you believe that they actually lived to be 98 and 103? That was back in the 18th century. We know, for example, that Mordecai was mining when he was well into his 70s, and there's even a rumour going around the place that Isaiah was able to outlive 16 wives. So just imagine being married 16 times, everyone. That might have been what finished the poor bloke off in the end, who knows? Bernard Young was an old soldier who had a wooden leg, and on account of that disability, there's only one job he was allowed to do. He was sat down here at the bottom of the mine shaft, and he would have been attaching and detaching the rope to the handle of the bucket that would go up and down the mine shaft full of lead. All right? They used to give him the very flattering job title of hanger-oner. So he was Bernard Young, the hanger-on, just what you want on your CV, isn't it? Last of all, we have TW for Thomas Wood. Now, he began working here at the very tender age of 6, but that was not very unusual back then. As soon as you were 5 or 6 years old, that was the legal age to be put to work in this kind of environment. However, that we do know a very tragic story about Thomas Wood. One day, in fact, it was the day before his 16th birthday, he was doing some work in here when a pile of loose rocks collapsed on top of him and killed him. It read on the death certificate that he was killed by a rockfall of his own making. So to die in here on the day before he turned 16, it's not the most optimistic story that we tell people. When that was freshly carved back in 1705, it would have been roughly level with their ankles. So you can use it as a good marker to show how much deeper into the rock they dug, searching for more of that precious galena. Now, if I can divert your attention over here to this very slimy looking rock under the leaky ceiling, would anyone like to just run a couple of fingers along the rock to see how strangely smooth its texture is? Anyone else? Alright. The 3 of you that have touched the rock are now going to need to either wash or amputate those fingers, because that's the overflow from the gents' toilets. Sometimes when I catch a little kid in here giving it a full body massage, and then I say that's coming from the toilets, they'll burst into tears. It makes me very proud of myself, as I'm sure you can imagine. Now, if any of you have ever been in a cave system before, or at least know what to expect from this sort of environment, is there something that you might normally expect to find in terms of rock formations that you've not encountered any of so far?
The hanging rock from.
Yeah, so remember what they're called? Stalactites, yeah, you've all got the basic idea. Stalactites are those spiky things that you normally find growing down from cavern ceilings. When they grow up from the ground, they're called stalagmites, yes. They're made out of a substance called calcium carbonate, which crucially needs moisture in order to form. That's why you've not seen any of those things down here, because it's quite simply too dry. We've been standing under a layer of clay dating back to the time when those volcanoes were erupting around here. And in that clay, the atoms are so tightly packed together that it basically, for us, acts as a shield, stopping the water from getting through. That's why you don't get the moisture, the water that stalactites need in order to form. What you get here, though, is a ventilation shaft carved out by the miners so they could get a bit of extra fresh air down here. There is water coming down from somewhere. Let's hope it's not the cafe facilities. But the water is coming down at much too fast a rate for a stalactite to form. So this is what you wind up with instead. You would call this a flowstone. And just like a stalactite will grow, the flowstone is growing at the rate of roughly a centimetre every 10 years. So it's only slightly less entertaining than watching paint dry, watching the flowstone grow. The miners didn't call it a flowstone though, they had a very different name for it, a more appropriate name if you look at it. They called it miner's sneeze, or the snot rock. So I'll let you decide which you find most glamorous. Overflow from the toilets or 300-year-old miner's nose gold. Right. And just to remind you that we are now standing in the middle of a coastal mass grave. You can actually see a lot of the fossils there. See all those round white shapes? They're called brachiopods, 300 million year old sea clams. They're pretty much the most common fossils that you'll find around here. A very revolting fact about brachiopods is that they propel themselves through the water by defecating. They quite literally poop themselves through the seas. Got a patch of light brown rock there. Believe it or not, that is a piece of coral. Since it would have been a tropical seabed, there would have been plenty of coral reefs around here as well to contribute to forming the limestone. Just a little reminder to you about what the rock is actually made out of. So we've got the ghostly voice of Thomas Wood down there in the Great Chamber. Have you got any questions for me at this point, guys? In that case, that's all there is to say about our tour of the Great Mason Cavern for today. I've got a final parting gift for you. It's a flight of 80 upward steps. I know you'll love taking that on. It will get to one point on those steps where you can see what appears to be a light at the end of a long tunnel. That might mean you're nearing the end, or it might just mean that you're dying of exhaustion. You'll have to take the risk. So once again, folks, my name is Matthew. I do hope you've enjoyed my tour. I hope you enjoyed the rest of your day here at the Heights of Abraham. If you're ready now to make your desperate escape, it's the same way that you came in. Now, no, I'll be following on right behind you.
Is that a good view?
It's okay. I'm nothing. Oh, sorry. Came for this.
Is this really 88 then? And that's the one.
You got an extra.
Yay! I'm not very fit.
Another dish.
Oh, this is wow.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, it's worth it.
That's worth it.
Well, you've got much better views than people had yesterday. At this time yesterday, there was no views at all because of all the mist.